Oh, well, hello there. Were you laughing at my bird-eaten copy of Fire and Blood? Well, the real Fire and Blood, also known as The Death of Dragons, is a, quote, blood-soaked tome, which, if you can find, is probably in worse shape than this. However, in that original Fire and Blood, The Death of Dragons, one thing you might be able to read about are the different types of breeds, the different breeds of Valyrian dragons that existed. We're told that the Targaryen dragons were bred for war, which means that some other dragons were bred for other things, and how not, and how not. Of course, just as with dogs and horses, you can have racing dragons, messenger dragons, all kinds of things. So this is a topic I talk about here and there. A lot of people have been asking me to expand on it. It is speculative, but it's very logical. So here we go. And just to let you know what we've got on this video, this is from a live stream that I did this past weekend, a 4-hour dragon lore iceberg. So as I do sometimes with the longer streams, if I have a good idea that's 2.5 hours in, I clip it out for you guys so it exists on its own. That's what we've got today. So I got a few minutes first on the different ways that the Valyrians used their dragons to conquer and manage their empire. That will lead us into the main section about what I speculate to be the different breeds of dragons. And then after that, I'll have a few minutes about the different dragon fights that we have from the dance and from the conquest, although there won't be any spoilers for season 2. And basically, I'll talk about the fact that dragon fights are insane and to the death. And I'll describe a little bit about their nature. And hopefully all of that will be some nice entertainment for this week, the calm before the storm, before season 2 of House of the Dragon. And of course, you can catch me and Grey Waste Tim and Girl Nettles at the after party. That's right, the after party, after every episode airs each week of House of the Dragon, of course. So thanks for clicking on the video and enjoy this little discussion about the Valyrian dragons, how they use them, and what kind of breeds there might have been. Oh yes, and I'd also like to give a thank you and a shout out to 2 of our artists who I used a lot in this video, Acrosaurotaurus, whose dragons you can see on the cover of the video, and of course, Hivemind 3D Designs, both of whom do great work, and thanks, of course, to all of our other artists as well, all of whom are human. Okay, so they've created this giant empire, obviously with the unbeatable power of dragons. I just want to point out that they have a lot of skills for maintaining this empire, which they did for 5,000 years. It wasn't just that they could use dragons to defeat anyone. It had several other advantages, okay? So Dragonstone roads and castles are important because they are able to be built fast with presumably with local materials. Like I said, the roads were a big part of the Roman Empire. Roads are how you move troops, and roads are how you promote commerce. So rapid troop movement allows you to suppress rebellions and makes everyone know that you can do it, okay? And then, of course, by facilitating commerce, you then start knitting together the conquered lands into a more cohesive empire. And after a while, people don't want to go back to more local regional rule because they can just get on a road and go where they want to and enjoy something that appears more like a modern form of life. And you get used to that. It's very comfortable. It's a little safer sometimes. So they use their roads and their ability to make the roads and castles to knit the empire together. That's very Roman of them. Obviously, the dragons facilitate air travel. So like when we put at the map here, you can see there's 2 sets of roads, right? There's these roads in the south that connect Valyria to Volantis and Voluntheres, Mentares, and then all the way over to Marine. And then there's this whole northern set to connect Sarnath and Sath and Asaria over to Cohor, Norvos, Pentos, and Goyandro. So the dragons are how you get in between there, essentially. And I'm going to talk about using dragons for troop movements. In any case, the air travel is important. Glass candles are the biggest thing. They enable all kinds of cool magic. They are like walkie-talkies, but they can be used for dream implantation as well. Quaithe with her candle can speak to Dany and hear what Dany says. So one person with a candle can enable a limited amount of two-way communication. And so once Dany has a candle, her and Quaithe will be able to do much better communication. But Marwyn the Mage talks to Sam about this. He's like, yeah, the Valyrians could talk to each other with their candles. They could sit at a candle thousands of miles away and speak to each other. Do you think that would be convenient? So think about running an empire waging war, you don't need to send birds. So the Valyrians have a limited modern way of communication. So I don't know how many glass candle sorcerers they have, but I'm sure every army would have a couple. So as the armies are moving around, they'd be able to communicate and they'd be able to see the enemy with their dragons flying around and then tell everyone else where. It's just like, good luck fighting these people. And that's why they maintained an empire for 5,000 years. So I just want to point out, it's dragons, but it's all these other things as well. And let's light the candles, shall we? Poof. Oh, now we can see. So types of dragons, this is speculative, but people love this, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about this. This all comes from one sentence that Jorah says to Dany. He says the Targaryen dragons were trained for war. They were bred for war. That's what he says, bred for war, and in war they died. Which made me think, if some dragons are bred for war, that implies other dragons are bred for other things. And the first thing I thought of was the road crew dragons. You wouldn't want a violent and aggressive dragon to make a straight road that's hundreds of miles long. All of the dragons that make fused stone have to work with sorcerers, right? The sorcerers are using fire, or they're commanding the dragons to train their fire on the specific part of the rock they want melted. Then once it's heated, the sorcerers have to harden it into shape, and then they move to the next bit. So that's how you'd have to do a road. You'd have to do piece at a time. Melt, shape, move on, melt, shape, move on and on and on. So like road crew dragons, here's what you'd want. Road crew dragons, you'd want their fires to be very hot. So you'd want big dragons because dragon fire gets hotter with age. But you'd want docile dragons. And we even hear that, and this is another clue about this, Melis and Caraxes and other dragons, Silverwing and Vermithor, that are kept up in the Red Keep and they have their food brought to them, they grow a little fat and lazy. They're still fearsome when roused, but they grow tamer. And dragons that are used to being around people are more tame around people, just like any other animal. And you can see the dragon keepers, they can put the dragons away with poles and Valyrian commands because they're just used to it. They're trained with food and things like that. So road crew dragons would be different than war dragons. They'd be big with hot fires, but you would breed them to be not aggressive. So then you'd have the battle dragons. They'd be bred for strength and aggression, okay? Racing dragons make a lot of sense. We're told that Melis is fast, really fast, faster than other dragons. And every animal that humans have ever bred, we breed some of them to be as fast as they can be. We breed some of them to be as big and nasty as they can be. And we're going to breed other ones to be as fast as they can be. So let me put Melis up on the screen. I think I have Melis. So this is by Samuel Quadrado. Sorry if I'm not saying that right. But yeah, there's Melis. Let me place it. So Melis is said to be very fast. And this, again, leads you to think, well, of course they would breed dragons for speed. And you would use those to send messages, to be scouts, or just for racing, just for kicks. The Valyrians are haughty and they are, they are hubristic. They're going to definitely have dragon-based recreation. So they're going to race their dragons. Messenger dragons potentially could be different. You might want some messenger dragons that are fast and small for short-run messages and errands, but you might want some that are bred for endurance, which might be bigger. Maybe lean so that they don't have to carry a heavy body. They'd have a leaner body shape and, a bigger wing spread so that they could fly long distances. So those would be endurance dragons. You'd have different kinds of long distance and travel dragons. Here's one I thought of last night. Troop transport dragons. This could make a lot of sense. If you had a big dragon, one that was a little more tame or just in tight control of a dragon lord, couldn't you load about, 20 good men? If you came up with a bigger, look at Vhagar. Vhagar is so huge. Let me pull up Vhagar from the show. So you see with the cargo net, like Lena is a little speck on the back of this dragon, right? You could definitely fit 20 men if you had a bigger harness or saddle. Think about Dune and all the Fremen riding on the sandworms. And they got their little litter, for the Reverend Mother. You could do stuff like that with dragons. So you'd want a huge dragon like Vhagar, and then you would just train it to be a little more on the docile side. Maybe you wouldn't use it to fight. You'd use it to move things. Just speculating, of course. But yeah, you could have troop transport dragons. You could also have show dragons, ones that are beautiful, like Sunfyre. So Sunfyre, the most beautiful dragon, quote unquote, to ever live, a beautiful golden dragon. Again, the Valyrians are vain. They're very into their own beauty and godlike nature. They'd probably have show dragons. They'd have competitions. They would try to breed the most beautiful dragon to show the other dragon lords, okay? And so I started thinking about what kind of a show dragon would you want? Well, you might want them to be small so that you could keep them at your court, like in your throne room, entertain the guests at dinner parties. So you want it to be docile and small, but with the most beautiful scales and maybe the most unusual horn shape and things like that, right? Color combinations. We've just seen, they're all amazing looking, but I think that knowing the Valyrians, they'd breed some to be beautiful and some, again, to breed small and docile so that you could keep them at dinner parties and at events, as opposed to your battle dragons. You could also have, just vamping further, you could have ones that are made for forging Valyrian steel. So the emphasis, those would probably be the same as the road crew dragons, docile, trained, super hot fire. Yeah, it's really fun to think about because, again, the idea that the Targaryens have dragons bred for war implies that others are bred for other things. And they seem to function a lot like other animals in so many different ways. So, yeah. And then the other idea is that, like, the Targaryens only survived with 5 dragons from Valyria. And if all the Targaryen dragons were bred for war, then they only survived with one type of dragon. And there were other lines of dragons that may have gone extinct. And that what Meles is showing us is, like, the variety in dragons with which you could breed. Like, if you had Meles and you mated Meles to the next fastest dragon that you found and kept breeding for speed, eventually you could get back to the racing dragons of old Valyria. So Meles isn't a racing dragon, but she's kind of showing you that some can veer more that way. And we also see that dragons of the same age sometimes are bigger than others. The black dragons are all huge, which makes me think that potentially the black dragons tend to be bigger. Here's Vhagar over Storm's End by Anato Finn Stark, capturing the terror and the size disparity. You don't even see Caraxes at first. So that just shows you. We saw that on the show. I don't need to belabor the point. This is some really cool stuff. This is by Hivemind 3D. This is Caraxes, obviously. Spicy noodle monster, Caraxes. Very worm-like. This is Grey Ghost by Hivemind 3D. I like this one because it just shows you the idea of, dragons burning ships. Valyrians would have done a lot of that. This is Vermithor, also by Hivemind 3D. And Tessarion, Cobalt Blue Dragon, another one of the most beautiful dragons. In fact, they could say that Sunfyre is the most beautiful, but I'd like to see Tessarion up close. Electric, metallic, cobalt. Anyway, nice artwork here by Hivemind. And this is Balerion in the Dragon Pit. It's very old Balerion. They made the dragon look so old. This is like Nana Vhagar old. And of course, near the end of his life, Balerion, more docile. They brought him, cows to eat. And he was kept in the dragon pit. So maybe older, larger dragons maybe they retire the big battle dragons and turn them into road crew dragons when they're old and tired. Not a very nice retirement. Better than fighting, I guess, but Anyway, this art is by Renee Agner. Pretty cool. And here's a little House of the Dragon. Like this one because it shows off the dragon saddle as well as the armor. All the Targaryens wore armor on the backs of their dragons. And the Valyrians probably wore Valyrian armor, such as what Euron had. You know, the richest ones anyway. Dragon fights, guys, are insane. Just like my bird, who's going to have to wait. I'm done with it. But dragon fights, guys, they are insane. And this is something we learn from the Dance of the Dragons Targaryen days. So without going into any specific detail about any of the fights, I have some general observations. Like we said, dragons grow forever, but they slow down. So the younger ones grow fast, and then they slow down. We know the dragon scales get harder, and their fires hotter. So it'd be harder for one dragon to rake open the belly of another dragon if the dragon is older and bigger, but it's really only the very oldest that would be impervious to that. The fires get hotter also, and it's only the bigger ones that can melt stone. That's why I was saying the road crew dragon's got to be big. So the eyes, wings, and neck are the vulnerable spots, right? The neck just because it's skinny, the eyes because they're not armored, and the wings because they're more delicate. And if they're flying and you damage the wing, then they will fall out of the sky and potentially die that way. Although I don't think we hear of any dragons dying from falls, to be honest. There's a few that do, but they continue to fight on the ground. So that might be hard. Well, falling on the ground is hard, but hard to break a dragon's bones, which have, you know, the high iron content and stuff. So we talked about controlling dragons. Now, Dany, if you remember, she's using a whip on Drogon, and she observes that the dragon goes towards the whip, whereas a horse goes away. So if you want to turn right on the horse, you whip left, and then it turns away from the whip. But dragons, they turn towards a threat. And like I said, they never disengage once they start fighting. So they're kind of like those aggressive little dogs that fight much bigger dogs, or like Goose, my bird, who wants to take on bigger birds. Like, the dragons know no fear, and they just attack. And once they attack, they never quit. It doesn't matter the size. So, for example, Arax attacking Vhagar was predictable. If you put two dragons close by like that and the riders have tension, the dragons will fight, and you will not be able to keep them apart. For the most part, the dragons do follow the commands of their riders. When Silverwing refuses to fly across the wall with Alysanne, she says that's the first and only time that Silverwing ever refused her commands. You know, when we look at House of the Dragon with Aemond, it's like, oh, well, Vhagar didn't obey him. Well, Vhagar did obey him, though, didn't she? Like, Aemond hates Luke and was using Vhagar to taunt him dangerously, and then tried to pull up at the last second. That's the only command that Vhagar didn't understand, because dragons don't understand pulling up at the last second. Once they're engaged in a fight, they never disengage. Never. So that was Aemond being foolish. So they don't disengage. The smaller ones do try to use agility, and this is the dance, where the dancing comes in. Agile movements. That's the advantage the smaller ones have. They will try to come around and get the other dragon from behind and get him in the vulnerable spots. Now, there's a couple of interesting dragon strategies that we see during the conquest that I wanted to mention. So, and this is similar to what we see with the dance, just like how dragons are used in war. With Harrenhal, we see the dragons can be used to break sieges, right? Like, oh, you've locked yourself inside the castle. Well, that's great. Dragons fly. We just flew over, and then we breathed fire in all the windows and just burned everyone. You can even melt the castle, but that wasn't even necessary. That was just style points. So they can break sieges. At the Field of Fire, we saw that they trump cavalry and infantry, and that you shouldn't fight in a field. Field of Fire, Renee Agner on the left, and on the right is Paul Ewell. So, yes, cavalry, infantry, not good matches for dragons. They just got burned up. And the way that Aegon did it is interesting. They got downwind, and they spread out, and they set fires around and sort of trapped them in the fire, so that as the fire spread, they had nowhere to go. So they burned a lot of people at the Field of Fire. And then at the Eyrie, Visenya just flew up to the top of the Eyrie, landed in the courtyard, and put the king in check. She took Ronald Arryn and put him on her knee. And by the time his mom came out to see that the dragon had landed, she's sitting there with the Prince of the Vale going, "Hi, would you like to surrender? I think you would." And so she took the Vale without a fight. So this is another way that dragons can be used. They can surmount physical obstacles, and they can be used to gain an easy submission without even a fight. If you can, again, put the king or the queen in check, so to speak. So you could see that with like Fagon, for example. And then the Dornish, we already mentioned, they picked up their insurgency tactics, no doubt, from the Rhoynish, being that the Dornish are Rhoynish. And that was only 700 years ago. They still retain a lot of Rhoynish culture. They would have had stories about how they fought the dragons, so they would have known. Yeah, you don't meet them on a field with infantry. And what did the Dornish do? They abandoned their castles. They hid in caves, and they just wasted their time. They just wore them out and waited them out, and they could never conquer them with dragons. It wasn't until the dragons died out and they did some marriage alliances that they brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. Garin the Great defeated an army of 100,000 Valyrians and 3 dragons at Volantharies, and he shot down 2 out of 3 dragons. It says his archers, but I'm guessing those were actually scorpion bolts and not just conventional archers. Because, of course, the Dornish were the only ones in Westeros to shoot down a dragon, which they did with a scorpion bolt. And so one presumes they had better tactics for fighting the dragons because they had the experience of the Rhoynar to draw from. And they knew where to shoot and how to shoot and maybe even how to aim and all that stuff. So, yeah, they shot down 2 out of 3 dragons. Unfortunately, the Valyrians came back with 300 dragons. And, yeah, that was that. Saramel and Croriane were sacked and destroyed. And they melted the river. They boiled the river. The Rhoynish took refuge in the river. There was so much dragon fire that they heated the river itself to boiling. And people burned alive in the river, which is pretty horrific for the Rhoynish who worshipped the river. And that led to Nymeria's exodus. Exodus.